Welcome to the Mind Money Spectrum podcast, where your hosts, Aaron Ogti and Trishul Patel, go beyond traditional finance questions to help you explore how to use your money to achieve the freedom you want in life.
In this episode, Aaron and Trishul discuss the trade-offs between security and privacy. Are you okay with free services like Google tracking everything you do online? Nobody out there has the time to read all the end-user license agreements that we come across. After all, someone out there must be keeping internet companies in check. And for now, to even participate in modern society, you have to give up some level of privacy. Even so, listen to the end to see how a little vigilance in the right places can go a long way. And now, on to our conversation.
Hi, my name is Aaron Ogti. I'm a financial advisor in the Bay Area, and I'm here with Trishul Patel, a wealth manager on the East Coast.
Hi, Aaron. Great to be here today, and thanks everybody for listening.
Great to be here as well. So last week we talked about kind of modern lifestyle security and some of the risks and kind of some of the very basic ways to protect yourself. Some of the big things like using a password manager and two-factor authentication. And we talked about one of the things to do with two-factor authentication, like one of the security questions that companies like DocuSign can pull. So they will go through public records, and I'm pretty sure it's based on like birth certificates, marriage certificates, and property records, and also loans. And they can put together some really interesting questions. And I know one of the recent ones I had was, does this name, what city did they purchase property in? And it was my dad, and it was actually after I had moved out of the house, and I'd been out of the house for over a decade. I was no longer living with my parents. They moved out of San Diego, bought a new house, and like, what city did they purchase property in? And it was a good question. Like, I don't know if anyone who knows me or has even met my dad actually knows what city he lives in now. I think they might know the state, but it was a really interesting security question because it's not like the pet's name. It's not something that I chose. And I was both kind of impressed by the quality of the question, but also just a little bit scared of like, how does DocuSign know this? And today I want to kind of talk about this kind of trade-off between security and privacy. When we think of like how many things are public records, and it's in this case DocuSign is using it for your security, but at what point is kind of either too much, or how do we judge it from a privacy perspective? The other really good example I kind of pointed out, my wife pointed out to me, is that if you use Gmail, which is a really good free email service, the ads you get in Gmail are actually really good ads. They actually are very relevant to you because whatever algorithm Gmail is using the words in your emails to provide targeted ads. And so like, while I don't think there's a human reading your emails, I would hope it's just a computer algorithm. There's technically something reading your emails if you're using Gmail. And it would not surprise me if this is kind of the same for most of the free email services. And so I kind of want to go into this, like, what is this trade-off between security and privacy? And things like even adding in the kind of convenience, because I know, like you've mentioned in the past, if you aren't paying for something, you are not the customer, you're the product. And this is like almost exactly what that is. And so when you think of this trade-off between security and privacy, kind of public records, free online services, what is some of the big picture things that you either want to be aware of or that concern you, or your first thoughts of when it comes to privacy, especially online, especially in just modern lifestyle with the internet and cell phones?
Right, good question. So what kind of comes to mind is the notion that we kind of get it at this point, the fact that we're sharing so much online that pretty much our entire lives are out there in the public view. And we put so much data on these resources like Gmail and our profiles at various social media outlets and whatnot that there's it's probably not a surprise that these companies know as much about us as probably we do about ourselves. So none of this is a major revelation at this point. And maybe it might have been like 5-10 years ago, but I think at this point we kind of all kind of accept the fact that this is just how it works. You transition to an online environment, you have all of your communications end up being online. You do all of your banking transactions, your insurance and health information. It's pretty much your entire life is online. But to kind of contrast that, privacy was a big thing, before the internet age, in terms of how our system of government and our system of democracy was, founded and initiated and set up. The notion that people should feel secure with things that they want to keep private, and it kind of flew out the window once all these technologies started to gain a better grasp on how we operate. And again, it's just no surprise that we all carry our entire lives on our phones, and those phones can, in theory, track every movement that we've ever done, throughout the day, week, month, or year, down to, a couple of feet. And if that information were to get into the wrong hands, it could be a bit of a pickle for you. So, it's this kind of catch-22 that we're living with, where it's so ingrained into society that I don't know if we can live without it at this point. But we all kind of realize we're likely making a pretty big sacrifice by leaning on these services.
That's interesting. So I had I my one of my thoughts was like, can we try to keep certain things private? But I guess that does make sense of like, if you're going to participate in modern digital society, the answer is kind of no. It's you can choose to just not have an online presence, which would be really difficult. That's a big, like, true lifestyle decision. You probably couldn't live in a city. Like, that's like going to the classic, like, off the grid. But I'd say it's a very, very small percentage of the population. So it does kind of feel like if you want to participate in modern society, this is almost like a collective acknowledgement of this is how we are moving forward. Does that sound right? Like it's it not a question of how do we keep certain things private, but it's like you have to acknowledge that it's kind of not private anymore. Does that make sense?
It is. We'll certainly talk about ways that you can do to kind of combat these types of concerns. And there are a handful of things that can help. But it's so hard given all the various ways that your privacy can be infiltrated at this point. Again, in the past, you keep your secure stuff at home, you lock the door, and that's
Yeah.
kind of it. But it's a whole different game now when your entire life is on some server that's halfway around the world.
So I think there's a couple things that I think about. One, I think there's a slight difference between like what you put on the internet versus carrying a cell phone around with you? Like you said, like we're no longer have locking secure possessions in the house when we leave. There's everything's out in the cloud somewhere. But that's one level. Another level is, okay, I have my phone with me, and so because I have all these technologies based on my current location, I can use maps. I can listen to a podcast while I'm walking. I can find a gas station as I'm running out of gas. There's so many things we use our phone for while outside of the house that there's almost certainly I'm giving up some privacy to be able to tell Google or Yelp I'd rather have In-N-Out than McDonald's. But so the kind of the internet, when you think of like what you're using on your computer when you're sitting at home, you have things related to your cell phone. But the third thing, and this actually might go back to some of our really earlier conversations about like happiness and well-being, is like my kids' school is teaching them mindfulness. And I think that's part of growing up in this modern digital society where you have to make those conscious efforts to leave the phone at home or turn things off, to get outside and embrace interpersonal relationships. And so that's like, there are ways to manage what we have acknowledged is kind of just the way society is going. So do you have any thoughts on that, either like just internet, cell phone, or management and coping mechanisms?
Yeah, so each one is going to come with, some pretty heavy caveats. So, if you look at recommendations and guidelines, first thing they kind of say is you got to understand the privacy policies of these providers that are giving these services. And kind of unfortunately, what that means is reading those end user license agreements.
Oh man, it's one of like, okay, so quick. One, how much do you read those? Two, is there a way to make them not super lengthy legal documents? Or like 2B, is that the intent? Do you think that there is, I don't want to say nefarious, but it's like they don't mind making them super complex and dense and dry because they're aware of the behavior of just scrolling past it. Right. And so like 3, like should we try to push to make that easier?
Yeah, there's a good amount to unpack there. And frankly, this affects us as business owners as well. Aaron, as RIAs, we're required to have similar privacy policies that we have to ensure that is, visible on our websites and also made available to our clients and prospects and whatnot. And, it was a concern for me as well when I was drafting mine up. I didn't want it to turn into one of those, like 50 pagers where, yeah, the status quo is, why not just copy every little thing that everybody else does, and that way you're covered and you don't even have to think about it. And nobody's going to read it anyway, right? That's kind of the status quo. I did manage to get mine down to, a page using, pretty big font, but still, these things are all over the place. And you may have heard, some of the anecdotes about these things where, like, if somebody really wanted to read all of these, somebody did some research saying, hey, it would take probably 1/3 of the business days that you're working in a calendar year to keep up with them. If you And that's just reading them. To really understand them, tons of legalese and cross references and implications that may not be obvious. You could spend your entire life like just that's all you do, making
Yeah.
sure that you understand what's going on with these things. There was another anecdote where there was a software firm that had a EULA, and buried deep in there, they said, if anybody reads this and lets us know and emails us, they're gonna, get $1,000. And it was a little test to see, is anybody really reading these? And they got thousands of people who click through it, and then finally months later, somebody said, "Where's my $1,000?" Right? So it kind of tells you it's less than 1/100th of 1% of people that might actually read one of these things, let alone all the ones that they pass through. And then, there's always that verbiage, we can update these at any time.
I'm thinking like okay, I spent 1/3 of this year reading all the privacy policies, and the next year I have to go back and reread all the new privacy policies for the same companies.
Oh, I wouldn't wait a year, Aaron. After you're done, you better start again at the top of the list.
I'm assuming I'm not doing like all of it. Like my 1/3 of the year is not the first 4 months. It's
Okay.
1/3 of each day spread out to the.
Okay. It sounds like you want to get something actually done.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's
go ahead.
nonsensical, right? It clearly sets up a situation that's designed to not work as people intended to. Now, there are other providers though out there that actually digest EULAs and provide warnings on things to look out for. So I think that is a good change. It's these third-party services that say, we've digested all these major EULAs from these big companies, and here are the things you need to watch out for, from each of these EULAs. So I think that is progress. But I think what we're going to be mentioning throughout this episode is just a big kind of cat and mouse game, or it's very hard for everybody to keep up with all these things because of how integrated online life is becoming.
This actually reminds me of it was Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, and one of the kind of key people or key like types of people in that I learned about in that book were called mavens, and these are the people who like they almost thrive on reading the legalese to get that $1,000 kind of thing. And so this is, I think, come up a few times where we don't need everyone to read every privacy policy, because there are just enough people who do read it that when they find something, they do a pretty good job of spreading the word, and you kind of hear about it in the news, or you'll see something online about a certain company's privacy policy. And this is a weird, like, I don't say a social contract, but it's like this kind of dynamic of, yes, every company needs to have a good privacy policy because someone will read it, not because everyone will read it. And this kind of works. And so I think that's why we need to have these policies in place. And if like for the people who are just skipping through, you can kind of acknowledge that you because there is a privacy policy, you have just a little bit more protection because someone is likely going to read it. It's kind of law of large numbers. Like, it's not quite the why or perfect, but just the same idea of like, you are protected by one of the thousands of people who will come across this. And if there's something like saying, we will steal your information, they'll kind of let others know. Like if it's anything outside of what is expected, they'll let people know. And so that's one of the things that kind of does help is, even if you specifically are not reading each individual privacy policy, because again, it would take up 1/3 of your year, there's still some protections in place just from being part of society.
Yeah, I agree. And this is where the notion of having self-regulatory organizations might be helpful. So these are non-government bodies, so it provides perhaps more international type of coverage, and it's not hopefully pulled one way or another for political reasons. But the notion is this is an organization that has a purpose to create and enforce industry regulations. And again, these are third parties that are out there, like rating agencies and things like that. They're designed to provide oversight from an independent perspective. And I'm kind of a fan of these if that they have the right mechanics built in and the right amount of leverage built in. You might see these, for example, where you buy an energy efficient appliance, or you have some sort of understanding that the product that you bought has been quality tested up to a certain standard, things like that. And I could see this area where having a green privacy star, or some sort of checkbox saying, yeah, your EULA is sensible, it provides the right amount of checks and balances, and it doesn't overstep its privacy.
Okay. Can you go over EULA again?
Oh, that's just a end user license agreement. It's just the agreement between you and the company,
Okay.
and
It's
it
the
has
actual thing I'm scrolling past and checking the box and saying
yeah,
move on.
that's
Okay.
it. Now, even if we have this type of thing, though, I think there is still some complexity to navigate. For example, I just opened my Gmail, the one that reads my email activity. And the tricky part with Google itself, we kind of get it at this point where, as you as we hopefully understand, Google has their search engine and knows everything you search. And if it's tied to your Google email account, your Gmail, well, then they know everything you typed and sent to other people. And then Google has a laundry list of other online type of products that are all kind of integrated in this fashion. So likely they know what you're shopping and where you're going on your maps. And Android is built on top of these Google architectures, and it's pretty much everything at this point. So then you kind of check out the privacy policy for this company, where is their motto still never be evil? I don't know.
Don't be evil.
Don't be evil, something like that. but they literally have your entire life at their fingertips. And yeah, their EULA is probably, their end user license agreement is probably buttoned down, and they do try to make it clear. But I just started scrolling through this one. I don't know how long it is in terms of pages, but okay, I'm gonna start at the top. I'm scrolling.
While you're scrolling, I did check it. Kind of used to be "Don't be evil" when they restructured the alphabet. They took on "Do the right thing" as its motto.
Bottom. I'm at the bottom now.
Okay.
Yeah, so do the right thing. But yeah, it took me like 10-20 seconds of just scrolling past pages and pages, and each of those linked to other things, and linked to other things, and so on. So the other thing to realize is within that there's a bunch of things that you can toggle on and off and left and right and up and down, and you have to kind of think, okay, do I want this or that, or do I want to give this much visibility and not give that much? So a few of the things to toggle are, right, I'm just going to read a few of them. One is your web search history. Do you want Google to have an entire infinite list of everything you've searched for from the beginning of time? The other thing is your location history. Do you want them to have every data point of where you've been, and how long you've been there from today until as far back as when you started using some of these devices? And do you want them to check your email, and so on? So these are all things to think about. And then of course these other Google products like YouTube. Like, do you want your entire video viewing history to be, stored on there indefinitely? Just something to think about. And you kind of have to make these decisions to opt out, right? You're already automatically opt into having all of
Yeah.
this collection. And it again, even if it's a clear EULA that I'm sure somebody has read Google's EULA, right?
Yeah.
And but you still got to make some pretty important decisions on how this affects you personally.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that has happened over the last year or so. So I have an iPhone and I've added a few apps, and now I'm always getting like the notifications like ask app not to track, because like the apps can apparently like track your other activity even when you're not using that app. And sometimes I wonder, like, is that why my battery doesn't last all day anymore? It could be that just the phone's 3, 4 years old now, but sometimes I wonder, like, how much background activity is going on. But I so one, it was like, wait, the apps, were they tracking already and I'm just now finding out about it? And two, I kind of appreciate Apple in this case trying to provide that little extra privacy component. And like they had a pretty big marketing campaign and like around Face ID and the new and one of the new phones. And so like you would have seen billboards or ads of someone's face, but it's mostly blocked by the iPhone, so you can't actually see who that person is. And it's like they were marketing about some of the privacy perspectives. And so it's like, okay, thank you, Apple, for doing this. I really do appreciate it. Thank you to one particular super large company for protecting me from the tracking of another random company that I use for different apps. And it's like, how much trust does there have to be? And so like maybe that's just part of like market forces with a business that, and I think there's actually probably a research like this is why people trust brands in terms of either quality or if Google's doing the right thing. And as long as they kind of maintain that trust that they're doing the right thing, then maybe it's okay. But then companies like Facebook lost that trust. And I don't know if they gained it back or if they've acknowledged mistakes. But like, I think at some point you kind of have to have some level of trust in some of these companies and some of these technologies.
Yeah, well, it's a very tough predicament, I'd say. Now, again, there are likely other choices you can make. You don't have to lean on Android, but they are, I don't want to make up a number, but they're a large percentage of the market share, and then you're kind of left with iPhone, and then beyond that, it's hard to say. Like for example, I just did a quick search on ranking of browsers, web browsers in terms of privacy, and they took 16 browsers and ranked them. Towards the bottom of the list, number 15, Microsoft Edge. So this is the newer version of Internet Explorer. And number 13, Apple Safari. Number 12, Google Chrome. And then you kind of have a bunch of no names. So the one I
I was gonna
use.
say, like,
Yep.
I know Firefox, and actually, I don't know if I can, like, I know Netscape Navigator, but I don't think that exists anymore.
Yeah, I don't.
Like, I don't know between, okay, Safari, Edge, Chrome, Firefox. I don't know if I can name another browser.
Right. So there's a bunch of small players. but all the ones you mentioned didn't make the top 10. They were 10 or worse, except for Firefox. They were number 2 on the list.
So what was number one? Just out of curiosity.
The Tor browser. So this is
Oh, okay. Yeah. That isn't that the one that is like this almost designed specifically to be the privacy one. It's like I learned about that when I was reading Silk Road. It's about a guy who basically created an Amazon for illegal products. And so like if you used Bitcoin to buy drugs online kind of thing. So it was like between the Bitcoin being not tracked and using the Tor browser that doesn't track. Um, I think there's also like maybe back in college, if you wanted to send music from a file sharing service, I think Tor was also the browser for that. Maybe I'm trying to think if it's been around that long though.
right. I think there was this concept of torrents, and that was
Yes.
for like
Yeah.
sharing. And I think the browser, I don't know if it spun off from that or if it was the predecessor or the cousin, but I think there's some relationship there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so too.
So,
So yeah,
so the
Tor is specifically being like the all privacy browser and nothing is tracked.
Right, yeah. So that's number 1 on the list. It's actually built off the Firefox engine. So it took Firefox and added some turbochargers on it.
Okay.
I actually did try it. It turns out it's pretty slow. It adds so much. You're basically, working with a turtle or tortoise trying to. So that's a trade-off, right? If it's that important, then you're gonna have to compromise on that. I think I also read there was some concern that part of the funding for the development of Tor came from the U.S. government.
Oh, really?
There's some articles on that, but I read it a while ago, so I think that the paraphrase is that that to get some of the development going, there was funding provided, and then there's just speculation on why they may be the case. The nefarious speculation is so the government could know how to insert their back doors. The other nefarious cases, well, yeah, the government also needs a secure browser to do its own privacy stuff. So,
I was
yep.
actually thinking it's like almost from the kind of the flip side. The companies, all the big name companies that you mentioned that are kind of low on that ranking, they make all the money to be able to pay all the engineers to make the service that much faster.
Yeah. Well, so that as we said before, these ads and stuff, they go somewhere, and if the product is free, likely you're the product.
Yeah.
So yeah, the big name companies, they have maybe taken a hit here and there, but they've probably done the calculus saying that we don't need to take privacy as seriously as some of the people, these browsers that are much higher up on the list, but just enough so that we're showing maybe a good faith effort or something.
Yeah.
And we're able to keep whatever percentage of the market share that we happen to control.
Yeah, they're not trying to be evil. They're trying to be a for-profit company that provides a great service, and in exchange, this is what they track. This is how they make their profits and provide you a free service.
Right. So, tracking is the big thing that likely happens for, again, likely these legitimate non-illegal reasons. And again, it's probably driven by a profit motive. These companies have these algorithms that digest what you're doing, and they figure out what best to serve you up. That's just kind of how it works. And if they serve you up things that are more relevant, then you are more likely to click and send more ad revenue their way. And that's kind of the way to understand it. Google is, yes, a technology company, but they're also an advertising company.
Mm-hmm.
That maybe the world's largest at this point. I made that statistic up, but I wouldn't be surprised.
So there's a I don't know, I saw probably a tweet kind of thing, but it was an interesting thought exercise of so with Gmail you have a free email service and it works really well. Um, at some point, like if you have been using it for long enough and there's enough emails that are stored, you might start paying them for the storage of a monthly cost. But it reminded me a little bit of kind of the journalism paywall discussion, where some of the best investigative journalists and reporting to kind of be able to pay their salaries and pay the journalists, they're starting to introduce paywalls or limits on articles. And it kind of makes sense. Like this is the high quality writing reporting, and they need to be able to make money to be able to pay all the journalists. And so this is kind of one of those levels of just I feel like the next level of business kind of thing, or the next level of kind of modern digital society. People are okay with small subscriptions if they see the value there. But the misinformation is never behind a paywall. It's always free and ready to be spread around the internet. And I do wonder if there's a kind of try to project this forward. Is there some kind of, I don't want to say dangerous incentive, or I think was it a Mark Twain quote maybe, or a Churchill quote that uh, a lie can spread around the world before the truth can get its boots on, or something like that.
Right.
And this feels kind of like that, where would you if you knew Google didn't have kind of track anything for you, would you be willing to pay for the email service? And then how many people would also do that? Now, from a business perspective, I do that. I pay for my emails so that client emails they're not as secure, but they're just a little bit more secure. So that I don't get the ads on my Microsoft Outlook kind of thing. But I, as a business, it makes sense to pay for domains and pay for servers. But at the individual level, I still use Gmail for my personal email account. And so kind of like, how do you think of that thought exercise of, one, would you be willing to pay for email when it's currently free? Kind of, is the value that you're getting through all the various Google services worth, and you pay nothing, is worth giving up the privacy? So say like you also have to attach a monetary value to your privacy, but if the counter is like, again, on the journalism side, where like the high quality information is behind a paywall, but the misinformation is being spread for free, maybe we would be better off if the New York Times tracked activity while you're on their site and offered more of these articles for free in exchange for trying to make money kind of the way Google does. Like, I don't know exactly how the business models will work, but kind of like, should Gmail start charging or should the New York Times be free?
Well, hopefully there's some middle ground there where you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. It's not necessarily easy, but like for example, thing one with my Gmail, I turned off the tracking based ads, meaning I just get served up random ads, not based off of what Google knows about me. So that's maybe option one. But then you still have ads, yeah, and there's other free email providers out there that are ad free and are much higher on that like privacy list. I guess if I did another search on most private email options, there would be other things out there. But I know that it's certainly possible. I'm kind of entrenched with the Gmail because I've had it for 18 years. And what do you do that when that email is on every individual you knows contact list, going back
Yeah.
that long. So it's one of those things where I'm a little stuck there, and Google probably knows it. And beyond that, they have all the other third-party products that are all integrated together: the Google Sheets, the Google Voice, the Google everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
um at that point, it just makes that switch a lot harder. Now, if somebody just kind of entering into this type of universe, an online space, they might have a better chance of pulling out of the black hole before they get sucked in. So I think that that's certainly something to consider if you're just kind of getting into all of this. But it's tricky if you're already in it, right? You already have your Facebook profile with your entire life history on there, and you have your email account for a decade or two, and so on. It's tricky.
I mean, to give you an idea, every kindergartner last year learned how to use Google Classroom.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah.
it almost reminds me like the cigarette of like get them while they're young, but like they're just targeting teenagers.
Hmm.
Google's targeting kindergartners and I think maybe even preschoolers. Like uh, preschoolers learn how to use Netflix really fast.
Yeah. Right. And those Chromebooks, you can imagine.
Yeah, yeah. Between Chromebooks and iPads, they make them really easy to use. Very, very intuitive, very user friendly. So easy a 3-year-old can use them.
Right, yeah. And again, there likely is a low cost solution for all of these different things, but you got to kind of piece it together yourself, right? You just can't go to, one login and use it in 50 different places. It's possible, but I think there's just a big barrier because it's just harder to pull off.
So in addition to uh, turning off the targeted ads on your Gmail, is there something else that you have done with privacy in mind, or do you just kind of accept modern society?
Well, maybe I'm kind of deluding myself to saying I'm giving a good effort, but I try a bit. Like I said, I every now and then if I see a privacy setting, I kind of, and I have the option to opt out, I opt out. I don't really need targeted ads, and it's not really that important to me that Google knows everywhere I've been in the last 10 years. But at the same time, yeah, there have been a few options that I've decided to zig or zag to. Like as I mentioned, I use the Firefox, and there's an alternative to Google search. It's called DuckDuckGo. It's just one of those options where it doesn't track everything you look for, and it doesn't keep a history. So it's similar, but again, it's a free version, and it's something where you kind of have to opt into.
Yeah, I feel like I'm just part of the masses where I I guess I've accepted it where I don't fear the loss of privacy. I- And maybe it's just my personality. Maybe it's kind of I tend to be more on the conservative side from that perspective, where I don't do anything particularly risky in my lifestyle. But the closest thing I can think of is I try to set up conversations with friends directly and meeting them in person. Like this past weekend, some friends around the Bay Area, we all met at a park and had a picnic where kind of we can sit and talk and kids can play together. And we've done it a couple times kind of since COVID, especially after everyone got vaccinated. But and that tends to be my approach is more just acknowledging the value. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm using all the services and I'm not necessarily scared, but this I have to make sure this isn't the only thing in my life. I do make sure to get out and have real conversations. But I tend to embrace the value that they provide.
Yeah, at a high level, the main concerns that come up, that are the tracking, and it's something that you can kind of live with if you don't really mind. And it's more of, maybe a slight nuisance, like you search for something and then all of a sudden you see it on your, an ad on your news website, related to that comment you made on Facebook and so on. Or you have the what do you call them, the Alexas and the
That the Alexa and Siri and Google Voice or Google Home, that's actually I'm glad you brought that up. That's actually different in my mind. Like my wife and I specifically avoid those because we don't want them to hear our conversations. So it almost gets back to that the idea of having those in-person conversations. I'm aware like anything I type online can be tracked, and I embrace that. Doesn't phase me. But listening to my personal conversations, I think does. Like that's one of the things that my wife and I specifically do not do. I think we also we have a smart TV, but we are cognizant about Internet of Things, and um, like I don't think I would want to get a smart fridge that tracks the food in your fridge. I think that's why the next level. It's like for me, my computer and my phone, eh, I'm okay with, but I don't know if I'm comfortable with that next level.
So what about like the location history on your phone, like every step you've taken?
Um, I think I'm okay with that. But again, back to that, like I think my lifestyle of where I go just isn't that interesting. So if that became known, it's I guess I really don't go places I don't tell people about anyways. If that makes sense. And so like I can actually even see if they know I go to this one place and the one place sends me a coupon, I'm okay with that. Like I'll actually use the coupon.
Right.
I'll save the $10.
And then there was this concern, I don't even know if it's still a concern, but how the webcams on our phones and on our laptops could potentially be hacked. And it was like, um, I remember reading like that the FBI tells all their agents that they have to put tape over those lenses because they can be turned on by third party sources without you knowing it.
Yeah. My wife has a little cool little slide cover for her camera that
Right.
she got maybe at a conference a couple years ago. But yeah, it's because you just slide it open when she has a meeting and she slide it closed the rest of the time. Uh, I don't have that, but also my laptop doesn't go around the house, so like it's more stays on my desk and sees the same background. But yeah, if it's combined with something like access to the microphone, yeah, I guess I don't know what I could do other than like having like the anti-malware and other just technology protections in place.
Right. So the second point beyond tracking is this notion of surveillance, and it can be either from a nefarious third party, or it could be from depending on where in the world you live, it could be like a government organization.
Yeah,
And yeah, the concern there is if some of these devices have like backdoors, or with the voice stuff, right? The Alexas and whatnot, they could be listening in to conversations, and certainly with phone calls, that's quite sensible that would be possible for similar reasons. And
that
then
that's a just the way you phrased it, the difference between um, tracking and surveillance, even though kind of they're the same activity, but I think it comes back to that trust idea where at some level, I guess there's almost like this implicit like I kind of trust Google more than the US government. And it would not surprise me if around the world, depending on the government, there is more or less trust in the government. And so I trust the US government more than I trust the Chinese or Russian government. I might trust like a um, Scandinavian country's government more than I trust the U.S. government. Was that so? I think that it almost comes down to that level of like that feels the difference between tracking and surveillance is trust.
Right. And we this was more top of news maybe 5-10 years ago, but the notion that the US government required backdoors for all of these major firms, pretty much the ones we listed, right, into surveillance activities for citizens. And there is the notion that with Big Brother and whatnot, the idea there in 1984 was, there would be this machine that could see you and track your movements, and it would be like a portal into your life. And by the way, we all have that today with our cell phones.
Yeah.
And like the tape thing that your wife had, that slide thing for the camera, does she have that on her phone?
No, she doesn't.
Right. So I haven't seen one for the phone either, frankly. But we all have the phone, right?
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things where, I try to be cognizant of it, but it's so hard. And again, we try to have the trust in some of these big names, but we just quickly saw that these big names aren't really at the top of the list when it comes to some of these concerns. Kind of take it for granted.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of like, is there any like concluding thought or takeaway? Because I'm almost like curious for people listening, like, is there any time that you have made a decision with privacy in mind, or kind of consciously accepting that's just how modern life is, as opposed to passively just accepting the status quo? Like, what have you thought about? Yes, I acknowledge I'm giving up my privacy, but the value is worth it.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I mentioned the tracking and surveillance is it kind of leads into the third main thing, which is theft, identity theft.
So, you know what? Actually, so this is actually one of the things, maybe over the last year or two, I've become a little more aware. I do wonder if my experience as a white male is why I'm okay. Well, I'm not worried about tracking and do have that level of trust. Whereas a person of color or minority wouldn't have that same level of trust.
Yeah, I the foundations again of our government initially was to allow, or basically push forward the notion that we should be secure in our privacy, in our private
Yeah.
things. And it, there's been reasons to believe that that there's been breaches along the way.
Yeah, yeah, but it's not only breaches. I think as a society, we kind of chose to give that up with online age and digital age. It's I definitely can't see us going back. I don't even know how. I don't know how we would start to enforce these kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it goes back to I think we're in this like kind of quasi middle zone where all of these changes came on, so quickly in the past 10, 20 years. It's just been one of those things where the first thing has just been the innovation of, hey, isn't this neat? I can send a message to somebody anywhere across the world, and they can reply back, and we can have a conversation, for basically free using this online tool. And the first evolution in this big change, secular change, has been just the ability to do this stuff. But I think in the next evolutions, that I think privacy will probably get its day. And it's one of those things where it's technologically feasible, but it just hasn't. The first priority has always been, let's just allow the ability to do it.
Yeah.
And then hopefully the next iterations will be, let's allow the ability to do it well.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see. Yeah, things like what I said with the iPhone and the Ask app not to track. Like there'll probably be more advancements there. I think it also, like, the kids growing up, they'll know to look for things that I don't know to look for. They'll just, because they have grown up with it, they understand kind of the nuance and will be able to be kind of apply the market forces to force these either companies or governments to allow for that kind of privacy.
Right.
So, yeah, it's one of those things where there may not be a takeaway. It may just be like, but it's like raising awareness kind of thing. Like just being aware of some of the unconscious default decisions that people are making, and it's just going with the status quo is still a decision. But if you're aware of it and conscious of it, then you can actively decide for yourself.
I think so. We've come across this bridge a couple of times where it's been a pretty complex situation and there isn't an easy answer, but certainly the first step is awareness. So I think that's probably where we're at right now.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the conversation today, Trishul. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I appreciate it, enjoyed it as well. And thanks, everybody, for listening. If you're enjoying these conversations, do spread the word. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of the Mind Money Spectrum podcast. Be sure to visit mindmoneyspectrum.com to access the entire library of episodes. Remember, it's not black and white, but the wide spectrum of gray area where you get to pursue the freedoms you want in life. Opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested in directly. Have a nice day.